Hello, my guest today is consultant paediatrician Professor Rashid Gatrad. I really like his story that on his first day at school in Malawi, Rashid's father said to his teacher, "Now, I want you to make this young man a doctor." Well, the father and teacher obviously had some special magic, because what follows is a truly outstanding career. Professor Gatrad, welcome to Life Stories. And now, all these years later, you look back to those sunny days in the African, east of Africa, wasn't it? East Africa. Central East Africa, in Malawi. What was it like growing up?
Yes, at that time, obviously, it was called Nyasaland.
Yes, Nyasaland.
A lot of fun. I don't think, one can imagine what life is like in a place where you could just go off to the lake at the weekend, play cricket as and when you want, because the weather's fantastic. And I think overall, it's interesting that some of the friends that I made there, even at the age of between 5 and 10, I still keep in touch with them.
All these years later?
All these years later, yeah.
That's wonderful.
So I think as a country, it's a phenomenal country.
But your family had moved from India to Africa. Was that a generation or two before?
My great-grandfather came in 1885 to Mozambique and then went down. The story is that he actually went against the current, can't believe this, with Shiri River, which is one of the biggest in the world, and established a business in near East Africa, and then moved on to Malawi and eventually to Blantyre, which is where David Livingstone met his friend from Scotland.
Yes, met Stanley.
Indeed.
Yeah. So, growing up then in that very warm and adventure land, if you like, what was it like at school? You started school, and that's a true story. Your father said to your teacher.
Absolutely,
how old were you then?
I was 5, and I remember this so vividly. That my teacher's name was Mrs. Fernandez, and he took me up the stairs. Remember, this is almost the first day of school, because my dad was one of the few pioneers who set up a school to make sure that people learned English. So he was, I suppose, in a sense, a big shot, well respected. And I think his words, make him a doctor, still ring in my ear. And I was just focused. Perhaps my career was carved from the word go.
So you were at school at that point with that lady, Mrs.
Fernandez. Yes.
At what age was it? Some years later that you actually decided that you did want to become a doctor and study medicine?
I suppose when you are young, you always want to play doctors even, and this is something I've never wavered from. Obviously, there comes a time in your life where you have self-doubts, whether you're going to make it. And particularly, I've done lots of exams in my life, but the one that is the most difficult is actually the A-levels. So in order to even get there, we didn't have our secondary education at all in Malawi. So we had to sit scholarship exams, and out of the hundreds, 4 of us were chosen to go to Rhodesia.
Now
to study.
Zimbabwe.
Yeah, now Zimbabwe, indeed. So that was an interesting...
So how old were you when you moved to a boarding school in
I was 11.
Rhodesia?
11 years old, yeah.
Your first time away from home?
Absolutely,
Was that
yes.
tough?
It was tough, I think, particularly for my mother, I think.
And how did you get on at boarding school?
Boarding school, loads of strangers there, because obviously never having been away from home. But having said that, there were a few children who were friends of my dad's, and they were a tremendous help, and one particularly was a very good mentor.
And I know you played a lot of cricket there. Are you still keen on cricket to this day?
Very much so indeed, yes. I actually played subsequently, that is when I was older, I played 1 or 2 international matches for Malawi, and I also played in the under-16s cricket in Zimbabwe. In those days it was Matabeleland and Mashonaland. And one of my cricket coaches was actually Colin Bland, who was one of the best fielders in the world. So he's from Rhodesia. So yes, so we had a fantastic time playing cricket.
And I have read that you were a bowler. That was your
Indeed, yeah,
your
that was one of my
special-
fortes. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
So I know that you then moved to England to do your A levels
Yes.
at a college in North London in Harrow.
That's right, in Harrow.
And then it's off to medical school
Indeed, yes.
in
Yes,
Leeds.
in Leeds, yes.
Good years.
Very good years. This was where again you get self-doubts whether you're going to get through your A levels. The difficulty was that at that time there was, again, not only doubt from the point of view of my ability as to whether I'll actually get the right A levels, but also doubt as to whether funding will come from my dad, because Malawi government was clamping down, and I had my brothers and sisters hopefully to follow after I had made some success of what I was doing. So I had to work as a postman for a short time to make sure that I don't run short of change when I'm at university. Yes.
Oh, good for you. Well, I think most of us did all sorts of work at university, but you certainly know where all the streets and the suburbs are in Leeds, do you?
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's
yes.
good.
Yes.
Then a young doctor, you
Indeed,
pass
yeah.
your exams
Yes.
and do well, and then it's off to Wakefield, wasn't it? Next.
Well, Wakefield was one of my first, well, in fact, the first job. So most of my sort of, shall we say, junior doctor's training was in the Yorkshire area, which is where I met my wife and so got
so
married
you
to her
were quite young
subsequently.
when you got married.
Well, no, I was actually 28
Oh, sorry.
when I got married.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was quite a few years down the line when I was actually registrar, working in Manchester.
And
at
was
this
she
time.
working in the hospital?
She was working in Wakefield, in fact. So I knew her for a few years before we got married.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So then, at that point, were you thinking, gosh, I want to specialise in paediatrics, or did that come a little bit later?
It came a little bit later. I liked obstetrics more than pediatrics, but I've had a slight back problem, and operating I thought might actually make this worse. So there's a condition called spondylolisthesis, which I was subsequently diagnosed. So I thought, well, operating might not be a good thing to do, but I enjoyed doing obstetrics. But pediatrics was something that I felt that I could really enjoy. And so from 1974 onwards, I've just done pediatrics.
And an incredible career, which we'll talk more about that speciality
Indeed,
in a
yes.
moment.
Yeah, sure.
But then there's a sabbatical. You go back home for a couple of years.
That's
and
right,
there
yeah.
you did general medicine, all disciplines?
Well, what happens is when you are in a developing country, you can't just be a specialist. In fact, the last thing they need is a specialist, really. So what I did was I trained myself in accident emergency, in anesthetics, in carrying out cesarean sections. That was a crucial requirement to work in this mission hospital, which was outside the main city, and was run by, we had a fantastic time there, it was run by Catholic nuns from Holland. So we had a super time when we got there. And I was dreading when I had my first operation to do on my own, which was a cesarean section. It took hours. I think I went in at about 10 o'clock.
So you remember that cesarean very well?
I mean, there was more sweat on the floor than there was blood from the patient, I can tell you.
Did the patient know that it was your first
No.
cesarean? No.
No.
Did you tell her afterwards?
No. But we got to a situation where, I did so many that people used to come and watch me operate, which was interesting, because I could do this operation within half an hour, as opposed to 6 hours. That was my first operation.
And what was it while you were back in Malawi and you were doing delivering and cesarean sections?
Yes,
that
indeed.
you thought, this is where I want to go when I return to England, if you return to England?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, a thought went through my mind that perhaps I might not return to England for two reasons. First of all, I was enjoying doing my work, which was the medical work. Then I was enjoying playing cricket, and I was really with my family. But you see, if you don't return in a short period of time, you lose your stage of your training, because I was nearly a consultant then, and my juniors had already become consultants by the time I came back. So I was back in the sort of race to try and become a consultant. Yeah.
And at that point, so you said, right, I'll come back to England. And was it easy or difficult finding a consultant?
Well, I had to get back into the same job that I left, and some of my juniors, as I said, had moved on. And I consciously felt that I needed to perhaps train myself a bit more, and perhaps when I was to become a consultant, that I could perhaps be a better doctor than I would otherwise have been.
Well, we'll talk about that next step and your move to the Midlands after this break. Welcome back. I'm talking to Walsall-based consultant paediatrician, Professor Rashid Gatrad, who after 45 years in the NHS continues as a powerhouse, helping children, families and charities in many parts of the world, as well as writing books and papers on specialist medical matters. Well, it's been an outstanding career. May I call you Rashid?
Please
Yes?
do,
Okay.
yes, thank you.
Rashid, an incredible career, and this has led, of course, to many accolades, and I'll just read a couple. You've been awarded the Order of the British Empire, the OBE, for services to paediatrics, the Freedom of Walsall, the Borough of Walsall, for halving the death rate of newborn babies, an incredible achievement, and you're currently the Deputy Lieutenant for Her Majesty the Queen.
That's right,
in
yes,
this
indeed.
part of the world.
Yes, indeed.
And you have your fine headgear
Yes,
here.
indeed. Yeah. Well, that's the medal one puts on around one's neck when you go on official duties.
And what sort of duties have you been taking part in? And,
Well, one of the ones that happens every month is to go for the ceremony for the citizenship. So people who are becoming British citizens, I represent Her Majesty and give them the certificate, and they become British subjects. And obviously, we have to talk about that sort of accolade to those people who get the certificate comes with a price, which is that they need to follow the laws of the land.
That's right.
And yeah, with that comes the responsibility of being
And it's a responsible role that you have in welcoming everyone into their the new chapter of their life.
Indeed.
That's it. That's excellent. So all these accolades, and you've written all these papers. In part one of the program, we were talking about your journey from being a 5-year-old, when your dad said, "Make this young man a doctor," to your teacher, and so through your school life. So now you've trained, you've passed your exams well with distinction, you've served as a doctor doing general work and a lot of cesareans and deliveries in Malawi, and you're back ready to become a consultant.
Indeed.
And that's what you're looking for. Now, I understand there was a rather special day when you were driving down the M6. Tell us about that.
You see, my wife and I had been to loads of interviews, and it wouldn't be really an understatement to say that we actually started with the alphabets. Things like Aberdeen, we've been to for interview. We literally were coming down, and we had reached Walsall, and I had not got a consultant job. Wasn't that easy at all. But having said that, we were coming down the motorway from Manchester to Birmingham. And this is 82, 83 we're talking about. And there were roadworks on the M6. The interview was at 2, and we were stuck. And there was just no way we could have got...
A complete jam.
Complete jam. And you see, in those days, there were no mobile phones. The only phones that were there were those phones that the workmen had. So I told my wife, I said, look, could you jump out of the car and see if you can ring up the Queen Elizabeth and tell them that we'll be late? She says, well, what happens if the car starts running along and, you know, I can't be expected to run behind you. So there was no way she was going to get out of the car. But anyway, I really desperately wanted this job. And I think this is where the spirituality in my life comes in. So I sort of promised the Almighty, and I said, look, you get me out of this mess, and I will try and do something big for you one day. And yeah, lo and behold, things just opened up, and I was in time with 5 minutes to spare. at Queen Elizabeth in Birmingham.
It's not often you hear a good story with a good ending after a traffic jam on the M6.
Absolutely.
But this is the exception.
Yeah.
So you got the job.
I got the job, but it's the covenant that was still worrying me after I got the job. And you promise the Almighty, you have to keep the promise. Yeah.
So what did you do? What was your, what did you
the
deliver
first few
then?
months of life, I was just sort of like a fish out of water because I was just thinking, I was doing my job okay, which was not a problem. But then one day I bumped into somebody who said, look, would you like to come and pray with us at this particular mosque? And I hadn't been there. And my philosophy really in life has been to try and help children, particularly as a pediatrician. And in Walsall, I was thinking, how do I keep these children occupied at weekends and in the evenings? And having spoken to this chap, I met during the congregation a chap, and I knew I had arrived, and I knew what I had to do. And 10 years later, we had a community center and a mosque built, and I was the project manager for this. We had to go around many, many places, including Portugal, to try and raise money for the mosque, which was initially £3 million.
Yeah,
but
£3 million.
We did it all for 1.3, because I did the shopping myself. I bought the bricks myself. I bought the steel myself. So yeah, we had to do it all ourselves.
How did you find the time with your medical?
We just had to.
Yes, it's incredible.
I think time is something that I look at it this way. I suppose it's a silly way of looking at it. There are 24 hours in the day.
Yes,
that's a long time to do a lot of things, And I think if you sleep 8 to 10 hours, it's a lot of wastage.
But as a doctor, do you take your own sort of advice, or do you sometimes push yourself a bit too hard? Would you tell one of your patients actually to calm down a little bit and relax?
I think it depends on what helps one to relax. And if it is the work that you do that helps you relax, then I think I'm comfortable with that. As long as it's not stressing you so much. If it's stressful work that you're doing, then I think it'll help you, it'll affect your health. But I think if it's work that you do, that you enjoy, I don't think there's any stress in it. Because some of the work that I do now, I don't have to do it at all.
Well, I'm not the doctor, you're the doctor, but you look very well.
Thank you.
Tell us about the early days in Warsaw and the achievement that...
I think one of the biggest things really was that lots of little babies after birth were dying in Warsaw. And one of my remits, I suppose, was to try and get that sorted out. So in the first 5 to 6 years, we were having 18 babies, which is called perinatal mortality, which is babies dying in the first week of life. So we were able to bring from 18 to 9.8, which was really a testament to my team rather than myself. We were together because you need an obstetrician, you need midwives, you need training, you need machinery. So we were able to get incubators, we were able to get nurses trained. We used to have pharmaceutical companies helping us prop up some of the money so that we could actually get our nurses trained. Now you actually have special midwives, trained. In those days we had to train the midwives ourselves. And interestingly, one of the midwives that I actually trained, she's a newborn specialist, and she actually trains me now.
So lovely. Cycle, isn't it? Everything
on how to
goes
resuscitate
around.
newborn babies. And now it's an interesting thing how somebody I trained is actually training me, because we had these sort of updates that we need to keep up with.
Now, I know that you travel around the world. You have travelled extensively, lecturing, giving talks, and you've got doctorates.
Yeah, sure.
And you've written many papers. Now, I know these papers are really for within the medical world, but
Sure.
you've done studies on bedwetting and constant crying. What conclusions did you come to on constant crying, for example?
You see, constant crying in babies crying is a common thing. That's the only thing they can do. Either they're busy north or busy south, one or the other. And I think in terms of crying, my advice is basically not only to parents, but also to young doctors and GPs, to how to use some common sense advice. The fact that babies are cold, the fact that babies need changing, the fact that babies are hungry are common causes of babies crying. But when it comes to medical reasons, there may be some simple reasons. It doesn't always mean they need a change in feed. It doesn't mean that they've always got colic. It may be that they may be constipated, and that whilst they're passing the toilet, they tear the bottom end, and that's hurting like hell. So simple measures to get that sorted out. So yeah, so you have to look at all the common causes of why babies cry.
So there are a number of things that a mother or a father or a carer can do.
Can do indeed.
Yes, but obviously, ultimately, if it continues in either of those situations, you go and see your GP.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What next for you? Because I get the feeling that retirement isn't on the agenda.
Now, I think as long as the brain works and the body follows it, I don't think retirement is on the agenda. Although having said that, I took my pension from the Manor Hospital in Walsall, and I still work there 2 days a week. So that is interesting because that keeps my network going.
And you've got, obviously, you'll work with University of Wolverhampton, Birmingham, and there's a link to Kentucky as well in the United States.
Yeah. And the fact that I'm a Deputy Lieutenant of the Queen, that's opened up many, many doors. I think the accolades that you talk about, as I see them more as opening doors. So whatever I've had has helped me to do what I'm doing. And to me, if I can actually help even one child somewhere with a cleft palate whose life has changed, can go to school, can hear, accepted into society, I think that is huge.
Well, I know that you're a mover and a shaker in sending doctors and colleagues, and including sometimes yourself, to many parts of the world to help children and doing an amazing number of operations when you're in a country where they need help.
Sure.
Professor Gatrad, you've had an incredible career and continued to do so, and it's been a pleasure talking to you on this edition of Life Stories.